History is being written right before our eyes. On June 9, 2024, a 50-year-old agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States quietly expired. The Saudis announced they would not renew it. Sounds like just another economic shuffle between nations, right? But this is actually one of the most critical pivot points in the global economy, capable of turning everything upside down. Because what expired that day was the petrodollar agreement, the invisible foundation that has supported American financial dominance for half a century. And without it, the dollar in your wallet, your savings account, your retirement fund, they all face a threat most Americans don't even know exists yet. Hold on. Before we dive into this research, I need to know something. Where are you joining from, and what time is it there right now? Country, city, local time? Put it all in the comments below. I really want to see how global this is. Now, let's get into it. When you hear the word currency, what comes to mind? For most people around the world, it's the dollar. That green bill with dead presidents on it has become the universal symbol of money itself. But this wasn't always the case, and it won't necessarily stay that way. If you had asked someone to name the world's dominant currency between 1720 and 1815, they would have said the French livre. From 1815 to 1920, the answer would have been the British pound sterling. The dollar's reign in our collective consciousness is simply the result of historical and economic events, and those events can, and do, reverse. Let me take you back to 1944. The world had just emerged from the devastation of World War II. Most of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. Factories were destroyed, supply chains shattered, governments broke. But one country stood relatively untouched: the United States. America's mainland hadn't seen combat. Its industrial base was not only intact, but had actually grown stronger during the war. The U.S. held roughly 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. It was the only remaining superpower with a stable economy. And stability was exactly what war-torn nations desperately needed. So countries gathered at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and made a deal. They agreed to peg their currencies to the dollar, and the dollar would be convertible to gold at $35 per troy ounce. This wasn't because everyone loved America. It was pragmatic. For international trade to recover, nations needed a common currency everyone could trust. The dollar, backed by gold and the strongest economy on earth, fit that role perfectly. Want to buy steel from Germany? Sell electronics to Japan? You needed dollars. And to get dollars, you had to either export to America or hold dollar reserves. This system had a clever side effect. Countries began storing their wealth in U.S. dollars and Treasury bonds to protect against inflation and currency instability. Japan, China, and the United Kingdom became among the largest holders of American assets through their foreign exchange reserves. We're talking about $7 to $8 trillion combined. That's an almost unimaginable amount of trust placed in American currency. But this arrangement had a fatal flaw built into its foundation. You see, America didn't actually have enough gold to back all the dollars it was printing. The system worked on confidence and the assumption that not everyone would cash in their chips at once. But in 1965, someone called America's bluff. Charles de Gaulle, the French president and wartime military hero, never liked the idea of dollar dominance. He saw it as American financial imperialism. So de Gaulle decided to demonstrate the system's weakness in the most dramatic way possible. He officially demanded that President Lyndon Johnson exchange $1.5 billion in cash held by the French National Bank for gold at the agreed rate of $35 per ounce. The math was startling. France was asking for approximately 16.5 tons of gold, nearly 3/4 of America's entire gold reserve. Imagine the panic in Washington. If other countries followed France's lead, the entire system would collapse within weeks. America simply didn't have enough gold. The emperor had no clothes, and de Gaulle had just pointed it out in front of the whole world. President Richard Nixon faced an impossible choice: admit the system was broken, or change the rules of the game entirely. On August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. He called it temporary. It became permanent. Just like that, Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and any physical commodity. The gold standard was dead. This created a massive problem. Without gold backing, what gave the dollar value? Why should other countries continue using it for trade? The answer was nothing, at least not immediately, and the consequences were swift and brutal. The dollar's value plummeted, inflation exploded, the economy stagnated, creating what economists called stagflation, a nightmare combination of high inflation and zero growth. But the real crisis was yet to come, and it would arrive from the Middle East. In 1973, Arab members of OPEC were already frustrated that their oil contracts were losing value as the dollar weakened. Then the Yom Kippur War broke out between Israel and Arab states. When Western countries supported Israel, Arab oil producers responded with economic warfare. They raised crude oil prices by 70% and imposed an embargo on exports to the United States and other Western nations. The result was the oil crisis of 1973. Gas stations ran dry. Lines of cars stretched for blocks. Airlines cut flights. Nixon urged Americans to conserve fuel and avoid unnecessary driving. Prices skyrocketed. The economy, already weak from the end of the gold standard, was now being strangled by the energy crisis. America desperately needed a solution, and that solution would reshape global finance for the next 50 years. Enter Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. In 1974, Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia for a secret meeting. Very few records of this meeting exist, but what emerged from it changed everything. The meeting took place aboard the USS Quincy, and the deal struck there became known as the petrodollar agreement. America promised Saudi Arabia military protection, advanced weapons, and access to technology. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all its oil sales in US dollars and to invest its surplus oil revenues in US Treasury bonds. Think about the genius of this arrangement. Oil is the most vital commodity on Earth. Every country needs it. Cars, planes, factories, militaries, power plants, they all run on oil. By denominating oil in dollars, America created artificial global demand for its currency. Want to buy oil? You need to buy dollars first. It didn't matter if you were Japan buying from Saudi Arabia or France buying from Kuwait. The transaction happened in dollars. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. Other OPEC nations quickly followed Saudi Arabia's lead. Suddenly, the dollar had a new anchor. It wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was backed by oil, black gold. And unlike gold sitting in a vault, oil was constantly being consumed and repurchased, creating endless demand for dollars. The petrodollar system gave America an extraordinary privilege. It could print money, and the world had to accept it because they needed it to buy energy. This system enabled the United States to run massive trade deficits without the usual consequences. It kept interest rates lower than they otherwise would be. It made imports cheaper for American consumers. Most importantly, it meant the world was essentially lending America money at favorable rates just to keep the system running. For 50 years, this arrangement was the invisible pillar holding up American economic dominance. The U.S. didn't just export Hollywood movies, technology, and military equipment. Its biggest export was dollars themselves. And as long as the world needed those dollars to buy oil, American economic power was secure. But that 50-year agreement just expired, and the Saudis have announced they won't renew it. Let me be clear about what this means. Saudi Arabia can now sell oil in yuan, euros, yen, or any other currency. They've already joined a China-led central bank project to develop digital currency alternatives for international trade. The project, called BRICS, has reached minimum viable product stage. The technology is working. This isn't theoretical anymore, and Saudi Arabia isn't alone in moving away from the dollar. The trend toward de-dollarization has been building for years, but it's accelerating. Look at the data. China and Russia have almost completely abandoned the dollar in mutual trade. More than 90% of transactions between them now occur in national currencies. Before Western sanctions, 70% of Russian transactions were conducted in US dollars. After sanctions, that figure dropped below 20%. The irony is brutal. Every time America weaponizes the dollar through sanctions, it pushes more countries toward alternatives. U.S. Congressman Thomas Massie said it plainly. We can do this while they use our currency, but at some point it's going to end. They're going to stop using our dollars as reserve currency. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is launching its own payment system called BRICS Bridge. It's still in development, but the infrastructure is designed around digital currencies and blockchain, meaning transactions will be secure, anonymous, and, crucially, independent from Western financial oversight. Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. They're not officially members yet, but they're actively participating in meetings and working alongside existing members. The alliance has ambitious plans. First, reshape the global financial system to increase the influence of developing nations. Second, promote Palestinian statehood, directly opposing U.S. support for Israel. Third, eliminate or reduce the impact of U.S. sanctions, which BRICS nations argue violate UN Charter principles. Here's a striking map. Countries in green recognize Palestinian statehood. That represents about 88% of the world's population. Almost all these same countries also support de-dollarization and BRICS expansion. The geopolitical and financial rebellions are intertwined. For most of the world, economic freedom means freedom from dollar dominance, and therefore freedom from American political pressure. Now let's talk about what the dollar actually represents for the U.S. economy. Think about what other major economies export. China is the world's factory, producing and exporting almost everything. Germany exports precision engineering, BMW, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz. Japan exports electronics and cars, Toyota, Honda, Sony. South Korea exports semiconductors and Samsung devices. Saudi Arabia exports oil. Russia exports natural gas, oil, and minerals. Brazil exports soybeans, coffee, sugar, and beef. India exports software, technology services, and pharmaceuticals. Australia exports iron ore, coal, and natural gas. Canada exports timber and minerals. France and Italy export luxury goods, wine, fashion. Switzerland exports financial services, pharmaceuticals, and watches. And what does America export? Hollywood entertainment, tech products, military hardware. But arguably the biggest export is dollars themselves. And that export is what keeps the American economy afloat. If your money is needed everywhere, your economy prospers. The petrodollar system created worldwide demand for American currency and Treasury bonds. This demand fueled U.S. economic growth, stabilized the economy, lowered interest rates, and ensured liquidity in financial markets. But here's the thing. Without the ability to export dollars, none of that works. Think of the U.S. economy like a balloon. In its normal state, the balloon represents a healthy economy. Every time there's a crisis or recession, The government inflates the economy by printing money. That causes inflation. If you keep pumping in money, the balloon eventually pops. The economy crashes because consumers can't afford anything. But America has a release valve. Through that valve, they export their dollars to the rest of the world, which needs those dollars to buy energy. It's a perfect pressure relief system. Except it only works as long as the valve stays open. What happens if the world doesn't need that constant flow of dollars anymore? The balloon pops. We've seen this pattern before in smaller economies. Greece nearly defaulted. Syria saw food prices triple and 80% of its population fall into poverty. Lebanon's pound lost over 90% of its value since 2019. Argentina's annual inflation exceeded 100% in February 2023 for the first time since 1991. When a currency loses international demand, the domestic population suffers. Imports become expensive. Foreign travel becomes unaffordable. Standards of living collapse. Now scale that up to the U.S. economy. America's national debt currently exceeds $38 trillion. The government pays interest on that debt. As of 2025, interest payments alone approach $1 trillion annually, roughly 13% of the federal budget. If demand for Treasury bonds decreases because the world needs fewer dollars, interest rates have to rise to attract buyers. Higher rates mean more expensive debt service. That creates pressure on the federal budget. It means higher taxes or cuts to services. It also stresses consumers, small banks, and businesses that rely on borrowed money. Right now, about 59% of global currency reserves are held in dollars. The euro accounts for roughly 20%. The Chinese yuan, which many consider the dollar's main competitor, represents barely 3%. According to the Atlantic Council, the dollar is used in 88% of all foreign exchange transactions. So the dollar still dominates, but momentum is shifting. Recently, 73 central banks reduced their holdings of yuan in favor of buying more gold and U.S. dollars. True. But that's a defensive move, not a vote of confidence. Central banks are hedging because they see instability ahead. The dollar is still supported by the most powerful military on Earth, an advantage that shouldn't be underestimated. But military power can't force countries to use your currency if they have viable alternatives. History shows that reserve currency status is not permanent. The French livre dominated for 95 years. The British pound for 105 years. The dollar has been dominant for about 80 years. We may be approaching the natural end of its cycle. So what are the three key conclusions here? First, the expiration of the petrodollar agreement is not just a diplomatic footnote. It represents a structural shift in the global economy. For 50 years, oil was the anchor that gave the dollar value beyond America's borders. That anchor is now being lifted. Saudi Arabia's decision to accept multiple currencies for oil sales fundamentally changes the demand equation for dollars. Less demand means lower value, means higher import costs and inflation for Americans. Second, the rise of alternative payment systems and currencies is not a distant threat. It's happening now. BRICS bridge, bridge, bilateral currency swap agreements. These are operational systems moving from development into deployment. The infrastructure for a post-dollar world is being built in real time. Once it reaches critical mass, the transition could happen faster than most people expect. Financial systems can appear stable right up until the moment they collapse. Third, American policymakers face a dilemma with no easy solution. They can raise interest rates to attract foreign investment in dollars and Treasury bonds, which they've done. But higher rates slow economic growth, increase debt servicing costs, and risk triggering recessions or bank failures. Alternatively, they can lower rates to stimulate growth, But that makes dollar assets less attractive to foreign buyers, accelerating de-dollarization. Both paths have serious downsides. This is what a trapped system looks like. Here's the warning. If you're holding significant wealth in dollar-denominated assets, you're exposed to currency risk that didn't exist a generation ago. Diversification is no longer just smart, it's essential. That doesn't mean abandoning dollars entirely. The US economy is still massive and innovative. But it does mean understanding that the financial assumptions of the past 50 years no longer apply. The world is moving toward a multipolar currency system, whether America likes it or not. The real question isn't whether the dollar will lose its reserve status. The question is how fast and how disruptive that transition will be. Slow erosion over decades is manageable. Rapid collapse within years would be catastrophic. And the difference between those scenarios depends on decisions being made right now by central banks, oil producers, and political leaders around the world. You can't control those decisions, but you can prepare for their consequences. Thanks for watching till the end. If you're here, you're one of those who want to understand how the financial system really works. Subscribe, new research tomorrow. And drop a comment. What do you think about this? Your perspective matters.